Hello, you lovely lot, and welcome to Who Knew, a Doctor Who podcast. It is, if I'm counting correctly, episode 40. We've had more episodes than that, but my numbering has gone all over the place, quite fittingly, for a Doctor Who podcast. And as always, I bring you wonderful guests all of the time. You know that I do, today is no exception. I have got a writer for Big Finish, and we love a Big Finish writer here at Who Knew, especially this one. It's the one and only Timothy X Atack. How are you, Tim?
I'm good, thanks. I'm very well. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to have you. Obviously, for anyone, surprisingly, who wouldn't know your work, I doubt that there's many out there, but you've written for Big Finish for a few years now. You've written for a variety of doctors, namely, recently, the Young War Doctor and the Ninth Doctor in their respective adventures. So I'm a big fan of those ranges, so I'm very excited to chat to you. But let's start where I always tend to start, which is at the beginning. So Doctor Who, were you a fan of the show growing up?
I was, yeah. I've been a fan for as long as I can remember. I mean, I had I reckon it's quite an interesting introduction to the show generally, in that I did not. It wasn't primarily through TV. I grew up in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, and sort of I was there until about the age of 10, so. Only very, very rarely did I get to see any kind of like Doctor Who on TV growing up. But whilst I was out there, I was like sort of gifted a whole bunch of books, and it included a whole bunch of the Target novelizations and some, and the making of Doctor Who was another one of those. And I think it probably like prompted some memories from just before my family left for Brazil, where I think, and this might be a false memory, I'm not sure, but I think I saw like sort of the end of one of the episodes of The Pirate Planet. I have this kind of like a very, very distinctive memory of seeing Tom Baker walking the plank into a white void and falling away, and that sting leading into the final music. And I think it must have imprinted on me somewhere. Because as soon as I was gifted these books, I gravitated towards them immediately and consumed them in kind of like a couple of weeks, and was hooked from there on in. So, in a strange way, you know, my original Doctors were like a whole bunch of 1 through to 4. And then that took me to the Marvel comics, which were kind of available out in Brazil, and that took me to Doctor Who magazine, and that was my contact with the show until about the age of 10, when I came back to the UK and was dropped straight into Colin Baker's first series.
Wow, that is a fascinating way into Doctor Who. I love I love hearing people's stories, no matter what they are. Because and a lot of people who come on the podcast are similar to me, where I started watching it in 2005, didn't really know about it beforehand, or started watching it when I was a kid. Well, that's fascinating. So the Target novels, reading Target novels in Brazil, which seems like a mad image to me, especially in Rio.
The raw material that I got was kind of like was the stories, and I didn't have the kind of like that visceral experience of seeing them on TV, but at the same time it really kind of like immersed me in that world, and there was very little difference for me between like sort of reading a Patrick Troughton story or a Tom Baker story or anything like that. And at the same time, like I said, I had the making of books, so I kind of like understood the basics of how it was all put together. So I got an introduction to it as a creative act as well. This idea that the program was passed on from writing team to writing team and was not necessarily the work of an individual, and so it was all very. I think that probably cemented an interest in kind of like the world building nature of Doctor Who. It took me into that area rather than it being something where I was like sort of engaged in a particular actor or a particular villain or something like that.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. So, out of those early Target books, I imagine a lot of Terrance Dicks.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
what are there any that stick out in your mind as like distinctly remember that particular story, or is it more of just morphs into one big
Yeah,
blob of Target books?
yeah. The Deadly Assassin really got me. I think
Yeah,
it had a particularly gruesome cover with kind of like the decaying master on the front. So I
yeah,
think I naturally gravitated towards that,
yeah,
and then I think the story itself was just I loved that kind of like that sense of a decaying Time Lord society, which then I got into before I kind of understood the backstory behind it
yeah,
from the perspective of kind of like the second Doctor onwards. Um, so yeah, there was that one that really drew me in. The Abominable Snowman, that kind of the Snowman, sorry, that kind of that had a few scattered illustrations throughout, which really
yeah,
intrigued me because Troughton's Doctor was such a kind of like a sort of like fascinating in his outfit, and I kind
yeah,
of yeah, and I found that I found the kind of like the images that conjured up in my head were fantastic ones, and it was always really interesting in the years to come to kind of like having held these stories for so long to like sort of find the DVDs or stream them and
yeah,
kind of like have yourself slapped in the face by the reality of the budget.
yeah, yeah. I mean, one thing that intrigues me then, if that was your major in, and like you said, you were exploring like Doctors 1 to 4, but you've barely at that point seen anything. I imagine you've probably not seen anything from 1, 2, and 3. So are
Yeah.
you at that point? Does the Doctor sort of morph into one continuous character rather than these separate incarnations that we sort of view them as? Does it more
Yeah,
become like a continuous narrative for you?
on some level, yeah. I think
Mm.
obviously, Tom's Doctor was so kind of like was so like sort of such a forceful presence that it was difficult not to see anything with him in it, even if it was the
Hmm.
tiniest little sliver of something, and not be absolutely kind of like enwrapped by that.
Yeah,
Um, there was just something obviously about his persona as the Doctor that really connected with people of my age. But I do remember also that it wasn't necessarily an entirely kind of like it wasn't something that I entirely kind of like uh, accepted no matter what. There was one occasion out in Brazil where the first Peter Cushing film was actually broadcast on Brazilian TV, and my parents woke me up in the middle of the night. I was allowed to get up out of bed and come and watch it because they knew that I'd never forgive them if I wasn't allowed to see
yeah,
it. And I do remember sitting there and watching it and sort of thinking, this isn't Doctor Who, not buying it,
right.
not accepting it. He's human. Hang on, this doesn't work. I remember that. I remember having that sort of like that moment of fan panic, even at
Yeah,
even at the age of 6 or whatever it might have been,
yeah. I was
and sort
gonna
of going,
that's almost an initiation as a
yeah,
real hardcore Who fan. You all of us have got that moment where you see something no, that's wrong, that's wrong. We don't like it.
my nieces and nephews are going through it at the moment, and they're kind of like there's certain things that they're just like getting very very angry about.
I can imagine. I can imagine. So I mean, obviously, with the writing and the story aspect of Doctor Who being so prevalent in your younger years, is that would you say that that's something that maybe led you more towards being a writer, or is there more external forces that made you want to move towards writing? Because I know that you've had a bit of I believe you had a bit of a career change as well. So you used to be a composer, is that correct? Or you still do some?
It remains a patchwork. I did.
Yeah,
I started out as a composer, but and I still, now and again I make music, but it's
yeah,
largely for a kind of like contained bunch of circumstances. But um, and that might yet change again. But I think I was one of the first creative things I ever did was I started drawing cartoons and doing what are now called graphic novels, and I filled up plenty of notebooks with kind of like strange superhero characters and things like that. I think the presence of science fiction was there from a very early age. I think I was not only into Doctor Who, but also kind of like found myself very, very attracted to Star Wars and stuff like that. And in terms of what led to the writing, well, yeah, I think there's absolutely no doubt that that kind of like the astonishing proposition of Doctor Who as kind of like the storytelling basics of it being so simple and so kind of like. And so, at the same time, so kind of like inspiring that if you boil it down to its component elements, it is, any travel to anywhere in space and time is possible, any companion on that journey is possible, and no one entirely knows who the Doctor is, and it's just those three things. And they shift and change throughout the years, but that's it. And I think I could feel that from an early age, and sort of think this is an astonishing way to like sort of kick any story off at all.
Yeah, that it is fascinating, and obviously your journey has sort of crossed paths now in a way that you are now writing Doctor Who. So they've sort of combined in a way, and that's through the medium of Big Finish. Obviously, Big Finish is a big sprawling web of content. There is so much of it. How did you get involved in that world? How did you come to start writing for Big Finish?
I asked. I asked my agent to send some stuff their way, and if I might be allowed to like sort of pitch for some stories. I had kind of like, I think I have to confess that I'm not massively up to speed with like the entirety of the Big Finish canon. It would take a while, I imagine.
I don't think many people are, to be fair. So don't worry about that.
Yeah, and I kind of but I knew that that the bits and pieces that I'd certainly heard plenty of stuff on like sort of the stuff that was broadcast on the BBC. I'd heard that, and I had I'd been fascinated from an early age again by the possibilities of Doctor Who audio. So so I wanted to like sort of I really wanted to like sort of let loose this pent up energy that I've building up through many years of kind of like devising Doctor Who stories. I just thought beyond like sort of constantly knocking at the door of the TV series itself, I would love to like sort of be part of this amazing expanding universe that Big Finish are building. And so I got my agent to get in touch, and sometime later they got back and said, okay, well, send us some ideas. And I did, and I think they chose the one with the best title. Here's my top tip: spend time on your titles. Every single time, it's without fail. The Big Finish team will go for the ones I consider to have the best titles.
The best titles, yeah. So was your first The Wreck of the World? Is that correct?
The Wreck of the World was my first,
Your first. So you've now obviously over the past few years you've clocked up a few Doctors, which is exciting. You've got 2, 4, 8, War, 9. So, I mean, I first came across your writing in the Ninth Doctor Adventures literally about a month, 2 months ago, because I've binged all of those sets in about a month, everything that's out up to now. Just from me personally, your 2 stories in those sets are absolutely magnificent. And I mean, it's a joy to me anyway hearing Chris back, because Chris is my Doctor. He's my first Doctor. So the idea of I don't know why it took me so long to get around to binging all of these audios, to be honest. But the idea of him coming back and having more stories with his doctor was so exciting to me. But obviously, there's that thing that every Doctor Who fan has, which is like, oh, I really hope they're good, and I really hope there's some really interesting stuff in there. And especially with your two stories, there is. So obviously, you've got Planet of the End, which comes in the second box set, which is a fascinating, weird story, which I absolutely adore. When you got told about pitching for the Ninth Doctor, and obviously it's quite a big event for him to return. What in your mind were you thinking? That's where you could take the Ninth Doctor, or what first came into your head? Really,
the first thing that came into my head was and I have to say that feeling of wanting it desperately to be good, when you're actually writing the thing, that applies in a huge way. There was a sort of like an enhanced excitement to the whole thing for me because it happened during lockdown, and it was obviously lockdown was a very, very strange time, and involved quite a bit of kind of like sideways steps for me in the kind of work that I was doing, and then the possibility of writing for Chris Eccleston's Ninth Doctor came up, and I'm sure it was the same for every writer. I dropped everything and spent quite a while zipping through lots of different possible ideas. And also I sort of felt that there's a sense that every now and then with some pictures for Doctor Who stories, you can kind of like assume that the Doctor is transferable on some level. I mean, it's not always the case, but which Doctor it is there's an aspect that you can kind of like that you can take as read that can jump from one Doctor to another. In this case, it felt like it wasn't true at all, and I think for me that it might have been a little bit of a personal thing, in that, you know, like in 2005 when I watched that first series in the revival, it was it was an incredible feeling, and looking back, I began to realise, you know, as the episodes went on, that every time I was switching on the TV to watch another episode, I was watching it as a kid. Yeah, you know, I was kind of. It was something that I'm not sure I even got as a teenager. You know, back in the kind of like the later John Nathan Turner years, because I think there was a little bit of me that was kind of like already being teenage critical of stuff.
Yeah.
And of course the program was in a kind of like a rocky patch there, and was, you know, with a few incredible exceptions, was kind of like struggling to make its way, and I was desperate to like it. But in truth, I was very often more. It was a bittersweet experience. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I've often said that when you're a Doctor Who fan, you absolutely love Doctor Who, even when it's not all that good.
Yeah.
And back then, I loved it a lot.
Yeah.
You know, it was a lot. I was like a parent. I just had to love it an awful lot. So, but with the 2005 series, I was in a place where I was genuinely watching it as a kid. I was kind of like reverting to being just like in open-mouthed wonder every single week, absolutely loving every last bit of it. So I was very, very keen to find that, to find stories that would reflect that. I wanted something that was going to have a kind of that was going to leave me awestruck as well, if that was at all possible, whilst I was writing it. So that was my main condition, and of all the different ideas that I threw at Big Finish in that particular week during lockdown, I think it was kind of there was quite a bit of back and forth in those conversations. It wasn't one of those where I pitched an idea and it just worked out straight away. Sometimes that happens. But in the case of the first Ninth Doctor adventures, there was a little bit more a little bit more kind of like conversation about what exactly was needed and what would be ideal for like sort of the different box sets and where they were going to land and all that sort of thing. So bit by bit, these different ideas started to form, and little bits of them were kind of like not considered quite right, and then they came back together. So it was kind of that first planet at the end was sort of a patchwork of things. I think I always had the graveyard planet, but exactly how it would be represented wasn't completely sure. And in terms of the villains, they kind of like came and went in different ways. There was a slightly more maybe the kind of like the sacristans were a bit more of a bureaucratic like sort of thing. There were more of them to begin with, all that kind of thing. And then piece by piece, what I realised that I was really going for was something that was the glue that held it all together. Was when I thought, I want this to be like a Studio Ghibli film for the Ninth Doctor. I want it to be like the bit in Spirited Away where she gets on the train and is accompanied by like sort of a fly and a hamster and a lamppost or whatever, and and is wandering through this lovely bucolic landscape on a quest. And I wanted that, but with the Ninth Doctor stalking along, being followed by some wonderful creatures and surrounded by odd things. So that's what made it all like sort of gel.
Yeah, and I mean that definitely comes across, and I absolutely. I mean, Fred is. I love Fred.
Sometimes you just get a bit of magic, and sometimes everything just comes together in exactly the right way. And the performance of Fred is astonishing, and I think that chemistry between Fred and the Doctor is like sort of just becomes the backbone of the whole thing. Yeah, and it just all comes together in this really, really magical way, and it was a joy to listen to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean there's some wonderful moments in there, and it's there are times with Big Finish, and this is purely a me problem, that my attention just wavers, and it can be quite a hard medium to get into. Because if you're listening to it while you're doing something, then all of a sudden your mind's gone for 2 minutes, and you're like, oh god, I've missed like half of the important plot points while I've been doing the washing up, and then you've got to rewind, and you end. I'm a lot like that, but this one, start to finish, no breaks. It did. I must say, it did help. I listened to it while I was on holiday, so I was sunbathing at the time, and I was, listening to Doctor Who audios about graveyard planets whilst sunning yourself in Tenerife is a very weird way of experiencing Doctor Who, but it really, really worked. But I loved it. I mean, these box sets for the Ninth Doctor, I think, must be so challenging to write, because there's so many things that you've got to. It's not like you're going in writing a standalone. So if you're writing a 10th Doctor story in the middle of his run, you can sort of just drop in, and the Doctor, exactly where they're at. Here you're basically visualising a side to the Doctor that we haven't yet seen. This is pre-Rose. Like, we haven't seen the Ninth Doctor on their own. We haven't seen how they dealt with the immediate aftermath of the war, what they were doing. You've also got the challenges of there's no companion, there's no constant companion, so you sort of have to build and introduce that aspect of it in your own story, and then close it off by the end. What did you find that aspect of it challenging? Were there a few times where you just thought, God, I wish Rose was here so that I could just have her ask a load of questions, or was it more fun to try and experiment with those challenges, basically?
Yeah, okay. Potential controversial opinion time. I think one of the beautiful things for me about the Doctor Who universe, and like sort of particularly kind of like about the precedent set by the TV series, is that it's a story without an author. it doesn't have an originating, kind of like authorial presence.
Yeah.
Which is, it began as a kind of almost as a focus group exercise, and was handled by a whole bunch of different writers. And sure, there are people who introduced like sort of huge like sort of like sort of concrete aspects that we've come to know and love in the series. But I sort of feel like one of the astonishing things about it is that it's remained a responsive thing. The Doctor Who sort of like universe has remained something that like sort of responds to necessity. Yeah. And it's kind of like one of those things which I think as a study, as a writer, it's an amazing thing to look at, because it's essentially like sort of 60-year game of consequences played out between hundreds and hundreds of different writers and different people who to begin with were like producers and now are showrunners. So I kind of like feel that that it's as valid a thing to respond as a writer to like sort of a desire not to investigate a particular like sort of facet of the Doctor's character, as happened with the Ninth Doctor Adventures, where it was pretty early on. It was kind of like established that Chris was not all that interested in going into like sort of the darkness and the grief. Of that character as kind of like bubbles up and spills over in his series on TV as the Doctor.
Yeah.
And that immediately to me was kind of like, there was a little moment where it's like sort of, oh God, that's a relief. Great. So we don't have to think about that continuity. We don't have to think about building that up. And it just felt to me that that kind of like you every now and then with Doctor Who, you've just got to let that stuff go. You've just got to let it go. Yeah. Because actually, we're writing it for here and now. We're not writing it so that it can slot in perfectly to like sort of this particular part of the universe. And I just felt straight away that it was kind of like, it was as soon as that happened, and it wasn't something to worry about. It was massively freeing. Yeah, and sort of at that point, anything was possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it meant that these stories could be like sort of rip-roaring tales of adventure, and that would be fine.
Yeah. I mean, I love that aspect of it, because of Chris's performance as well. Because you get to see, obviously, there's a lot of incredible stuff from Chris in Series 1 with all of the grief, but I love just hearing Chris have fun, like as the Doctor, just letting loose, especially now after everything that he's been through in the in-between, and obviously he's had a bit of a rocky relationship with Doctor Who over the past 15 years, and for him to come back and just you can hear it in his voice how much he's loving these scripts and these stories and just having fun with it. I think it's the way to go if you're going to do it. It's rather than retreading all of that old ground. But yeah, I can imagine that it's incredibly freeing. I do just want to touch on your other Ninth Doctor story, because it is one of my favourite Sontaran stories, if not my favourite Sontaran story ever written. Salvation 9 is so fun, so much fun. I absolutely adore it.
I can't tell you how much fun it was to write. It was unbelievable. I'm quite a when I can be, I'm quite a physical writer. I will very often get up and deliver the lines because I want to know if they're going to be sayable to begin with, and I also want to know if it's going to inspire people who work on it. So I want to get excited by it myself. So I very often get up and wander around and do stuff. I was doing that so often in Salvation 9. I was doing it all the time.
Yeah, doing your best Sontaran impression. I mean, it must have been lovely. I feel like as a writer, if you're writing for the Sontarans, if you're writing something down and you know that Dan Starkey is going to say this line, that's a very reassuring place to be, because it's like Dan Starkey is just going to kill this line. Like Dan Starkey is the Sontarans for me. He's the quintessential actor at this point.
I certainly had him in my head. It was very difficult not to, and especially with the Salvation Sontarans, who were kind of like obviously riffing on that Strax type Sontaran created by Stephen Moffat. But I think there was also the question of who might be the old school Sontaran, and I have to say, when I heard Dan doing his kind of like his old school BBC RSC actor slumming it on Doctor Who impersonation, it was an absolute joy. It was kind of like I just couldn't stop grinning.
Yeah, I again listening to it, I couldn't stop grinning either, because I immediately took to Twitter and was just like, if you haven't listened to Salvation 9 and you like the Sontarans, please go and listen to it, because it is. I love seeing something different. My two favourite Sontaran stories, which are this and War of the Sontarans, which obviously aired last year. So I've been spoilt for Sontaran stuff recently. They're two completely different stories, because for me, War of the Sontarans is a greatest hits of the Sontarans. You get a lot of the tropes, you get a lot of the old favourite, you get that wonderful new design as well, and it works as a wonderful tribute to them. But Salvation 9 just does something completely different with them. I was so excited. That first reveal, obviously of the concept behind it. I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't listened.
For sure.
But I would urge anyone to. Moving on from the Ninth Doctor.
Yeah.
To another Doctor who you seem to have gravitated a little bit towards Doctors who don't have the longest of runs. You've also got some War Doctor stories behind your belt. Some young War Doctor stories with good friend of the podcast, Jonathan Carley, who does an incredible War Doctor. He's
obscene.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
It is ridiculous, isn't it? It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
He did it a bit. He did a bit live for me when he was on the show, and it was like getting dropped into the Time War. It was actually quite scary. What's the differences for you? Because obviously the War Doctor, if you're going from the Ninth Doctor, you're sort of ignoring the whole Time War aspect, and then you go into the War Doctor and you're dropped right in the middle of it. How do you tackle writing for the young War Doctor, which I imagine has a lot of freedoms in terms of characterization?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Doctor is still the Doctor. I have to say, I think there's kind of like a funny red herring that runs all the way through that storyline. But at the same time, I still like asking that big dramatic question of what led the subsequent regenerations to reject that incarnation, and I think the trick is that when you're kind of like part of a team of writers exploring this character in greater and greater depth, you don't really want to blow that possibility in your own, in one fell swoop. Yeah, you don't want to kind of like knock everything else out of the water and have the appalling incident that will seal this Doctor's fate for good. So there's always this gradual act of chipping away at what the kind of like the real atrocities of the Time War might be. So every single time I do one, there's this little question that I have about what's the next step, and sometimes it's a little bit of a stumble, and sometimes it's a full on kind of like mistake. you know, a real proper error, such as the Doctor in any other incarnation might not make. And so, yeah. Each time I wanted that sort of like to be bubbling away. The thing that I've seen recently that most makes me think about this is kind of like is Better Call Saul. And I don't want to, you know, for anyone watching that series currently, I don't want to spoil that either. But
yeah,
I know
I'm in series 2 at the minute. But
okay,
go
there
ahead.
you go. But I know that I know that the central dramatic question of that for the people who wrote that series, and I think was what does it take to create Saul Goodman? What does it take for a man to become Saul Goodman? And to chart that. And I think there's, for me, a similar thing going on with the War Doctor. You kind of like it's a slipping towards darkness, and you want to you know, show those steps one by one.
Yeah. I mean, your stories for the War Doctor again are fantastic.
Hey, thanks, mate. Thank you.
I mean, Rewind. I listened to Rewind today.
Yeah,
and I'm not going to spoil anything.
Well, yeah,
but
it's tricky not to talk about.
It's very tricky to talk because I especially don't want to talk about anything with Rewind. But
there I wanted to, I wanted to create a situation which was absolute desperation and despair and kind of doing that without it not being Doctor Who, you know, without losing those quintessential Doctor Who elements. But I think there's an aspect to each time you're also bound up in things that are essentially war stories, of course. And the original kind of like briefs from I believe from Nick Briggs for the War Doctor stories were for each of them to feel like a war film of a different kind.
Yeah.
So there was that sense of, you know, with the first one with Consequences, I knew that I was going to be part of telling a longer story, and there was going to be lots of conversation between the three different writers and with Matt Fitton about how that all like sort of slotted together. But I thought that for my particular segment, I'd gravitate towards one of those war stories, which is actually a road movie as well, which is kind of like, you know, something like Apocalypse Now or something like The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, that has this kind of like this long extended journey with lots of different characters, you know, coming in and dropping away and having different roles to play in it. So I knew that was what I was focusing on for that first War Doctor story. And then for Rewind, it just felt like there had to be something that was like not necessarily a war film as such, but like that absolute sense of despair that must come from being in the trenches in something like World War One, where it just felt cyclical. It just felt like this thing would just keep returning and never ever stop. And of course, with Doctor Who, you've got a very, very, you know, good device through which you can tell that.
Yeah, and like I said, I love your War Doctor stuff. I love just all of the War Doctor stuff that's coming out of Big Finish at the minute, and I think Jonathan Carr is again just phenomenal, and he lights up the scripts. But your work for them is brilliant.
Thanks, man.
We're going to take a very short break, very very short break. But when we come back, we've got some features to attend to. The first of which being the DVD collection. So we will see you in a couple of minutes. Hello and welcome back to Who Knew, a Doctor Who podcast. I am still your host, Josh Carr, and I am still here with Tim X Atack. Wonderful first half of the show. We delved into a lot of wonderful stories that were written by Tim, but it's time to hear about a story that Tim loves and a story that Tim deserves a story that Tim believes should go in the DVD collection.
By the power of Grayskull.
The Unicorn and the Wasp or Love and Monsters?
Which one do you think I'll prefer?
No, I mean, which one do you want to watch first?
You are pulling my leg.
Well, I had to read the list of things that had already been chosen about like sort of 6 or 7 times.
It's getting long. It's getting really long.
No. But I had to read it in disbelief that this hadn't yet been chosen.
Right. Okay.
So
that's exciting.
Because I'm going to go for Genesis of the Daleks.
Oh my god!
Because there's. I'm going to have to do a callback to the first half of the podcast here because of this this aspect of me growing up in another country and not really having any kind of connection to the TV show itself. And but what I did have one fateful Christmas was I had the present of the audio version of Genesis of the Daleks on cassette.
Oh, lovely.
So this was gradually over the years worn out from the amount of times that I played it. So I knew this story first and foremost as a 60-minute audio drama. So here's another thing that feeds into the Big Finish side of things, and I tried not to spoiler that earlier on.
Yeah.
but I knew Genesis of the Daleks first of all as an audio story, which has sort of, for those who don't know it, there are bits of Tom Baker narration on this cassette version on vinyl version to sort of fill in particular gaps or speed up bits of the story. And then it's kind of left to it's just stuff that's lifted off the original broadcast, and it's left to the listener to fill in an awful lot of the gaps, and it works surprisingly well. It kind of there's every now and then where you're not quite sure who Nida is koshing, for instance. Every now and then you're not entirely sure who's talking to whom because some of the voices are slightly BBC similar, Yeah. But it was still one of those things where it just sparked my imagination in the most amazing way. And then I didn't, see there was one time when we kind of headed back to England on holiday, and I was able to see a little bit of a repeat of Genesis of the Daleks that was being sort of broadcast. I think it was in '82, and I think it was during a season of repeats called Doctor Who and the Monsters or something like that. A little this comes from a little bit of kind of Google-based research.
Yeah.
But I did definitively see a bit of Genesis of the Daleks, and still it was an edited down version. So I never really got to see the full thing. I knew the story from having read the Target novelization, but I never got to see the full thing until it was released on VHS in the early 90s.
Wow.
Then I got to sit down and watch all sort of 6 glorious episodes of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, firstly, I like I said, there's a lot of episodes in here, and the Genesis of the. I mean, I'm quite annoyed because you've taken away my one example that I use all of the time of a story that will eventually get into the DVD collection because it's so infamous as being one of the best Doctor Who stories. I always say, well, you get your stories like Genesis that'll probably get in here someday anyway, so pick a weird one. But I am so glad that it's in because obviously it's lovely to hear. I love hearing people's personal connections. And even aside from that, what is there to say that hasn't already been said about Genesis of the Daleks? It's one of the greatest Dalek stories ever.
Still, yeah, and it still stands up. This is one of the things about it. It's kind of it's one of those kind of classic Who stories that still kind of has a. It's pacey as hell. It's a real, I think Barry Letts described it as a page turner, and it is. The fact that we all know that all our classic Who favourites have one or two things that always lay them low, and it's like Harry and the Clam. That were is probably the case here. But all the same, it's kind of like it has it looks great. I mean, this is one of the things that I always sort of slightly forget about Genesis of the Daleks, probably because of the fact that I know it first and foremost as a soundtrack. But I forget how good it looks. And how good it looks in comparison to an awful lot of stuff around it, even in those wonderful first few Tom Baker seasons. And it kind of like, it has that. It's been lit in a creative way, and in a way that probably I imagine it might have raised eyebrows at the time because of that standard way of lighting BBC sets that was there, because TVs weren't the best you could imagine, and like sort of you wanted to make sure that that grannies in Birmingham could see every last bit of it. I think, as the phrase was, I think, in the studio at the time. But in this case, you have these amazing kind of like, even the corridors look good. Yeah, they're kind of like people pass in and out of lights as they move down the corridors, and that's how atmospheric it is.
Yeah, and just so many iconic moments. You've obviously got the wires scene is just that's one of the biggest Doctor Who moments that always gets brought up. That's in the Corridor of Fame that we get to later. That's the clip that's used in the theme tune to represent Tom Baker. Is Do I Have the Right? And you've got that entire scene with the Fourth Doctor and Davros as well. All of the moments between the Fourth Doctor and Davros, but the yes, I would do it. That is
all that stuff, and all that kind of like all those moral grey areas was such a fantastic thing to have experienced as a kid. I have to say, there was a kind of, even as a kid, I kind of understood that the kind of like would you kill that child? That sequence was a kind of like an allusion to Hitler and questions about what would you do if you understood that a great evil was born and you might have the ability to stop it. Even back then I understood that that's what it was talking about, and even then I understood that there was kind of like a sort of a genuine question there, a real question, and this is what I was mentioning earlier about proper dramatic questions that drive a story forward, and the fact that it ends with only a kind of like a half victory for the Doctor also makes it stand out in the most amazing way. And there was me, back in the day as a kid, thinking, "Wow, this is possible." Things don't always end with the Death Star being blown up. It can end like this, and it can still feel right for it to end like this.
Yeah. Very much that sort of Empire Strikes Back kind of quality of the loss at the end. I mean, fantastic pick. What more can I say about Genesis of the Daleks? We've got an abundance of Dalek stories here already, because everyone loves the Daleks. I mean, I've got the wrong side, but I've got all of these boys here, and also, we've got an abundance of Fourth Doctor stories as well. I don't have the list in front of me. I believe this may either take him joint top with the 10th Doctor. He may edge it. He may just be one off. It's them two battling out at the top for the most stories in the DVD collection. But you've definitely helped Tom's case here by putting one of his best in. So, wonderful pick.
Glad to be part of the team.
Brilliant. Yes, definitely part of the team. Now, obviously, we haven't had an abundance of questions from Twitter today, because a lot of people are very excited that you're coming on, which is always wonderful. So we're going to try and plough through those in a segment that I fondly call Bloody Twitter.
For God's sake! Bloody Twitter!
Excellent.
Yes.
You just need to say it in the way that Matt Smith says it. That's what you need to do.
The theme tune is David Tennant saying it in Broadchurch. I thought the Matt Smith was a little bit too on the nose, and we've got a lot of Doctor Who in here, so I thought I'd mix it up with a Who adjacent clip instead. Maybe I'll change it one day, and maybe we'll get a bloody Twitter from Matt Smith. Maybe it'll regenerate.
Fair dues. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got a stack of questions here. Firstly, from Cal, loyal listener of the program, at generic_tweeting. Cal has a couple of questions. First one is, how does it feel having one of the coolest pen names in Doctor Who?
It's got to the stage now where actually people are pronouncing it correctly, because of a distant cousin of mine who now has her own TV series, and I believe was on things like Celebrity Juice and stuff like that, Emily Atack. So, so we've got to the point now where more often than not, when I'm kind of like going about my what I laughingly call a daily life, people are pronouncing my surname right,
rather than X Attack,
rather than
which
as
I imagine
an
you've had
X-wing
many
attack
times.
or something like that.
Yes.
In fact, I think the American branch of our family do pronounce it attack, but there you go. That's in keeping. So
yeah. I mean, it looks incredibly cool, especially
it's almost all real. It's almost all real. But like you said, I started my my career as a composer, and there is another Tim Atack who's a composer. So I had to, in fact, who is in fact Emily's uncle. So I had to. And we both in the past have worked with comedians. He's worked with Ricky Gervais, I worked with Matt Lucas back in the day, and we've both there's all so many ways in which we might be confused. So so I kind of like he worked for quite a few years before I sort of like graduated. So I bowed to his seniority and put a stupid initial in the middle of my name. Because for all kinds of complex reasons, I'm not allowed to use my genuine middle initial. Yeah. So,
Right, okay. So why did you pick X? Is it just because it's the one that you never see?
It's partly because it's meaningless and attention seeking, but also because there was a precedent in the shape of one of the producers of Futurama is David X Cohen, and I thought, okay, well, I'll just go with that as well.
Well, wonderful. I mean, I love it. It's a great name, very very solid name. Cal's other question.
It's doing good work for me.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Cal's other question is, what's your favourite story out of the ones that you've written for Big Finish?
Oh man,
it's a tough one.
It is tough because they'll always. I don't know. There's a. I really can't answer that. They've all had different qualities, and I have to say that every time I do a Big Finish story, I try to somehow make a change for myself and make it a little bit different and move along in some way. So I really, really enjoyed writing stuff where I was effectively trying to represent the sort of like the feel or the aesthetic or the themes of a particular era of Doctor Who. I really, really enjoyed doing that. And now, the more of them I write, the more I'm kind of like moving away into kind of asking about what would it feel like if this era of Doctor Who was a little bit different, was pushed in a slightly different direction.
Yeah.
So I've got a really, really great fondness for Salvation 9 because it kind of like feels like it has a mixture of those two elements. I can sort of imagine it being part of Chris's era of Doctor Who. Can sort of imagine it being part of of Russell's era of Doctor Who. And at the same time, it feels like it might have pushed in a slightly different direction. And I've got the best of both worlds, effectively.
yeah, perfect. Like I said, I imagine that, like you said, writing Salvation 9 as well is a lot of fun because I haven't done much writing myself at this point. I'm a budding writer, but I haven't done a lot of writing myself. But
well, okay, welcome to the club. That's the same for every writer. That's how every writer would describe themselves.
But writing for established Doctor Who monsters and villains, I love doing that. It's a lot of fun for me. And
Yeah,
if and when I ever write a Dalek story, I'm gonna let loose, because that's gonna be me in my element. The next question is from Jack at @an_awful_Jack. Again, very good friend of the show, the host of an awful lot of running podcasts, which you should definitely go and listen to. And I will be back on that podcast on their Battles in Fandom in a few weeks, because I somehow won, so now I'm through to a winners round. I've fluked somehow debating about Doctor Who, so now I'm going to be back on. Okay. So if go and check them out and follow Jack, because then you'll be able to catch it in the future for anyone at home. But anyway, Jack has said, a fantastic guest. Absolutely love Timothy's Ninth Doctor and Ninth Doctor and War Doctor scripts. Which Doctor Who villain is your favourite, and which would you like to write facing them? Which Doctor would you like to write facing them?
Oh, blimey. Okay, all right. Which Doctor Who villain is my favourite? That's a very, very difficult question to answer. I have a kind of like I think I know Big Finish have done some Sutekh, I believe. But there's kind of like one of the interesting things about Sutekh, and one of the reasons why I think Sutekh has this allure is because there's relatively little of him, and yet he is kind of like this all powerful, like sort of completely malevolent manifestation, and could like sort of there's a great deal that you might be able to explore, and of course there's that great mystery of kind of like the connection with Egyptian myth and Earth and aliens, and that sort of thing that we keep the modern humans keep naturally gravitating towards that idea. So I think there's something I'd like to see. I'd like to see Sutekh meet 12. That would be interesting.
There's not really a Doctor pairing with Sutekh that I think doesn't work. They all work in very different ways. Yeah. But I think I'd be intrigued to see them all. Nine and the Ninth Doctor and Sutekh would be a great face-off. That would be I think. I'd be intrigued to see some of the lighter Doctors as well. Like, I'd love to see Jodie. I'd love to see Jodie versus Sutekh, because it's completely different. Yeah. You wouldn't expect that kind of Doctor to have the not that she doesn't have the gravitas, but she's not necessarily one of the big booming powerful, like lording it over, controls a room kind of Doctor. Seeing that Doctor against Sutekh would be very interesting.
One of the interesting things for me about 12's journey is that he's got this he's got this journey from kind of like a kind of like that question that always surrounds the Doctor's character from day one, about kind of like his how self-motivated is he, all that sort of stuff, and then with Capaldi's Doctor, there's a fact that an awful lot of the latter part of his seasons turn into questions of what it is to be kind, and what it is to kind of like be he turns into a benevolent alien again, basically in full, and so it's that side of 12 that I would like to see meet something like Sutekh.
Yeah.
Is what kind of is kind of like being kind enough against something so malevolent and powerful, and of course I believe it is, but that's one of the great. It's a great political question as well in some ways. It's a great political metaphor. So yeah, that's a great pick. Great answer. Very very good answer.
Write that one down.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Joshua Carpenter, again, another dear friend of the show. They've all come out in force. At Joshua CC252 on Twitter. He said, what dream box set run would you love to run yourself, or be a creative lead for Big Finish?
Okay. All right. I think actually a while back I started like kicking around ideas for kind of like unusual combinations of characters, and I sort of like I thought there would be a really really interesting thing if you did a kind of Doctor Who version of this is not necessarily involving the Doctor, but a Doctor Who version of Suicide Squad that just involved all the kind of like the either slightly amoral or easily guided robots in the series. In some case, maybe some of the genuinely evil ones as well. But you know, kind of like if you teamed up, I don't know, D84 with Drathro from Impossible Planet, and you know, like a renegade Mavellan or something like that, and you had this kind of like this team of they've got to be robots because there'd be something driving this which was about like sort of servitude and about like being kind of like morally in hock to like sort of a bigger, more malevolent force. Something like that I think would be very very interesting.
Yeah, I am so on board for that. I'm now thinking of every robot in Doctor Who and thinking, could they work? Like, I'm thinking, my mind immediately went to Gadget from Waters of Mars with a gun, but maybe going akimbo this time. AK-47s.
What's it the Doctor says? I hate a wacky robot, or I hate a silly robot.
It's a
funny robot.
A funny robot. Yeah,
Hate funny robot.
Yeah. That's where my mind immediately went. But that's a great pitch. I hope that is sitting on Nick Briggs's desk, waiting to be made and commissioned right now. Joshua's other question was. Any tips for someone who hypothetically wants to learn more about writing, who loves it, but only has a GCSE in English? And he also said both of you guys are awesome. So thank you, Josh.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah. Tips for I don't know. Given that I've kind of like had a strange like sort of like I said patchwork career as a writer, and you know like sort of it's always coming and going. I think that's just like a given for most writers' careers. I think the main thing is just to write as much as you can and find as many opportunities as you can to get it seen by people. And I have to say that there are lots of ways in which people who don't necessarily have kind of like have a massively channeled career as a writer can find themselves like sort of with bits and pieces of attention in the industry. And one of the best things that I ever did was a Channel 4 course called For Screenwriting, which is run by a guy called Phil Shelley. And it was an amazing piece of kind of like artist development for me. It gave me the opportunity to write a pilot for Channel 4 and to sort of like have that picked apart by professionals, and that's open. So things like that are open to everyone. I mean, you know, it helps to like sort of like hone your scripts before you send them off to anything like that in a big way, and it sort of like and it feels like there are more and more opportunities for doing things like sort of like setting up your own stories in podcasting and stuff like that. I, for one, would like to see many more fiction podcasts. Probably doesn't surprise you to hear that, but yeah, I just find the outlet that suits you best and start making stuff for it. Just start, you know, writing and making things. The GCSEs and A levels won't matter ultimately. It's for me, I think the main thing for a writer is the quality of your listening. I think it's about how you listen to things, how you listen to people, how you feed that into your stories.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to starting writing, I must say, I know Joshua because I'm running a Doctor Who fan audio project. He's writing for that. He's also writing for about 16 others. So if anyone doesn't need that advice, it's Joshua. Joshua is writing about 400 scripts at any given time. So Joshua, crack on. Prioritise mine, of course, but you know, crack on. And next question. Obviously, we've mentioned it briefly that you're a composer. Another friend of the show, Dalecium, who is a Doctor Who orientated composer, but a wonderful composer of anything in his own right.
Yeah.
He said, Timothy, I love your work, and your 2018 remix of the Doctor Who theme is a personal gold standard for what I want the theme to be. So, I mean, there you go. I expect you weren't expecting many composer questions today, but yeah, obviously that is something from Dalecium there. But his question is, what would you want the theme for Shooty Gatwa's era to look like or sound like?
Amazing question. Oh, and another. How long have we been talking for, Josh? We've been talking for over an hour, haven't we? Because I could bang on about this for 2 more. Yeah. Oh wow. The first thing to say is having thanks so much for the very, very kind words about that version of the theme tune. I made it because I was essentially because I was complaining about lots of the other versions of it, and I wanted to basically put myself in the hot seat and stop my complaining by realizing how like sort of tricky it was to do a version of that tune. And it proved to be so. It took me loads of time to pull that together probably over about like sort of 2 years tinkering with it here and there. And it's a fiendishly difficult piece of music to make a version of without it sounding cheesy as hell. That's the bottom line. It's kind of like it's a deceptively simple like sort of set of components, and yet at the same time, do it in just slightly the wrong sound, and the whole thing starts to sound like awful. It just sounds very, very on the nose somehow. So, what would I be looking for the new theme? I think there's a little bit of me that kind of like hopes. I don't know if it's been confirmed that Murray Gold's coming back onto the team this time around. I don't know whether there's been any.
We don't know yet.
We don't know
any
rumours or news about that.
There's lots of rumours, but we don't actually know yet.
Perhaps what I'll say is that I think like sort of the in the same way that that Delia Derbyshire's version of the tune was kind of was absolutely what was needed for like the 60s and 70s. It's sort of like Murray Gold's first version for the 2005 revival was absolutely perfect for that, and was kind of, I think it sums it up in the most amazing way. And I think that combination of the fact that he mixed the elements of the original original theme with kind of like that orchestral bombast, I think that worked absolutely perfectly for what Russell was building, and I kind of hope that there might be sort of like a slight return in some ways to the to kind of like that beautiful combination. If you do, my theory is that if you add far too many kind of like standardized instruments to the Doctor Who theme tune, it somehow like sort of becomes a bit standardized, and it feels like for instance, I'm never a fan of adding drum kits to it and stuff like that because I think it kind of like reveals the slightly clod hoppy nature of the beat, and there's a word of my grandma's for you, clod hopping. Anyway, I sort of feel like I hope there's kind of like something that's found in that original simplicity and is emphasised and amalgamated in the same way that Mr. Gold did back in 2005.
Yeah, that's a wonderful answer. This is a question from me. What would you say is your gold standard? What's your favourite?
My favourite version of the theme.
Your favourite version of the theme, yeah.
I think it's the one. Now this is we're getting into specifics here, but I think it's the one from kind of like the specifically kind of like later Pertwee Tom Baker era when the tape of the theme tune had started to get a bit worn and it begins to sound a bit like dub. It's got a bit of distortion on it, and it started to kind of like they've added just a couple too many elements to it. and they've played it a few too many times, and it starts to feel very, very hauntological at that point, and that's my favourite state for it.
Yeah, it's that is up there. That's definitely up there for me. Next question is from a man that you may know quite well. In fact, you've written for him a couple of times. It's Jonathan Carley. At Jonathan_Carley.
Amazing.
Jonathan said, well, he put "Yas" in big capital letters, and he said, "Premium guest, Tim has written some of my favourite scripts. Just make sure he knows this." So I just wanted to include that first of all, and then he said, "Actually, here is a question. Tim's world building is incredible, but where do you start? Do the settings and characters lead the story, or are the settings and characters shaped by the story you want to tell? And are they based on anything in the real world, or just exploring ideas?"
Wow. Well, first of all, right back at you. We've never met, but maybe one day. Yeah.
Oh, you've never actually met. Well, I suppose with lockdown and everything,
it's been tricky and an awful. There's obviously still an awful lot of remote recording because it's still one of the best ways of getting things done at the moment for audio. And world building. Wow. Okay. It tends to be, generally speaking, led by character, and I tend to take the best way I've got of answering this actually is to talk about the best world building I know, in sci-fi, which is the original Star Wars film, and I think what a lot of people kind of like tend to forget because we're so familiar with it now is how little exposition there is in that film that's about the world that surrounds the characters. They just take it as read. They kind of like just get about their lives, and it's very, very rarely that anyone's sitting around going, well, this is how this particular spacecraft works, and we need to make sure the audience knows exactly how it works. Otherwise, they're not going to buy this story world. It hardly ever happens in A New Hope. So that's my model, and I kind of like try to avoid as much as possible people talking about the world they're in. Of course, that's very, very difficult in audio drama because you have to set about describing things very often through dialogue. But you just try. I just try and generally do that for a reason that's connected to character. So the only reason that someone will say something in particular about the story world, about the kind of like the environment that they're in, it'll be somehow subtly like sort of locked on to, as well as subtly as I can. It'll be locked on to something they need to do, or something that they're feeling quite a lot of the time.
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting that you mentioned before about I'm sure you mentioned before about world building, and the world building in Doctor Who being something that drew you in, and like I say, you build such. Rewind comes to mind in that within minutes you're in that day-to-day life, and you feel plonked in the middle of it, like you're observing it as just one of the other people in the Rewind. That's what it feels like. You're walking amongst those streets and you're living that day-to-day life. So world building is obviously very, very key to your writing as well.
It's interesting with Big Finish because always you have to like sort of pull together an outline. You have to pull together a one-pager that can be read by the execs at Big Finish and then passed on to the BBC for clearance, and so you tend to find yourself doing a little bit of pre-planning there because you don't want to rely on something that that is letting it trip you up, that you haven't included in that. Is vital to your story, and yet the Beeb might have a problem with it and might not want it included. So a little bit of world building happens in advance with Big Finish stuff, but then I tend to find myself also discovering things. As much as possible, I like to discover things as I go along, And it's only when I ask myself, how do people sleep in this world? How do people like sort of use other computers in this world? That kind of thing. Then I start to like sort of fold those things in bit by bit. And sometimes it's just on a whim, and then I have to follow through later on in the story. And sometimes surprising myself that way, putting in, like for instance in Rewind, that it's not necessarily a very, very heavily technological world, and their computers sound like they're from the 1980s, all that sort of thing. That kind of like led to a feeling later on that I wouldn't necessarily have to. That there'd be a little bit of fairy tale aspect to it, and so the castle fed into it and all that sort of thing. And so it's sometimes just feeling your way musically, to be honest. It's almost a musical act.
Yeah. Well, that was bloody Twitter. So thank you. That we didn't manage to get through all of the questions, but I hope you don't feel like that was too much of a grilling. But they can be quite intense at times, my listeners. But they were some wonderful questions.
I've never loved Twitter more. No, that's great.
No, I don't think anyone. It's a very strange time to love Twitter, especially. Well, I mean, thank you for everyone who submitted questions, and apologies if we didn't get around to yours. But obviously, we've got to move on. We're careering towards the end of the show. We've got to keep that Genesis of the Daleks pacing up. And we're going to move on to our last feature, which is a very special one, very close to my heart. And we're going to see whose portrait is about to be hung up in the Corridor of Fame.
Have you ever been limited by who you were before?
One day, I shall come back. Yes, I shall come back.
Our lives are different to anybody else's. That's the exciting thing.
Yeah? Sarah Jane?
Do I have the right?
Some people's small, beautiful events is what life is all about.
An anniversary compared to us. 10 million years of absolute power. That's what it takes to make me really
Every great decision creates ripples. Like a huge boulder dropped in a lake.
But it was a childish dream that made you a doctor. You dreamt you could
No more.
I'm not just the type. I'm the last of the kind.
It just disappears, doesn't it? Everything you are gone in a moment, like breath on a mirror.
I do what I do because it's right. Because it's decent. And above all, it's kind.
Love abides in the face of everything.
So, for anybody at home who doesn't know, the Corridor of Fame is, of course, a collection of people who have been submitted by my wonderful guests. And it's basically a hall of fame for Doctor Who. It's where people are celebrated. Maybe they're unsung heroes. Maybe they're the legends of Doctor Who. But here is where we get to chat about them and basically give them the praise they deserve. So, Tim, I'm fascinated to hear, who have you chosen to go in the Corridor of Fame?
Well, I'm glad that you said that it's a portrait that's hung up, because in the little document that you emailed me beforehand, it was like, who would you like to be hanged in the Corridor of Fame? And I had this kind of like almost Vengeance on Varos style image.
Oh,
yeah. Oh, it's a portrait. Okay, great.
It's a portrait that we're hanging. Maybe I need to reword the document.
I won't feel bad about this then. Okay,
yeah,
right.
Good.
Well, if I've ever had any idea of what it is that I wanted to do as a career, if I very, even as a kid, I very rarely had sort of like a concept of like, okay, so this is what I want to do for a living. But the closest thing I've ever got is that I wanted to become part of the radiophonic workshop, and I kind of like had this image of myself spending my life doing spending my life creating all the different spot effects for all these different worlds in Doctor Who. So I'd like to put Dick Mills into the corridor.
Oh, lovely, lovely.
I think Mr. Mills might be. I don't know whether this is still the case, but he might be the most credited person in the history of the show. I think.
Now that's fascinating. That's something I've actually been thinking about this recently. It's a question that I've asked myself. I've thought, who's going to be the person with the most credits? Because a few people come to mind. Like there's so many people. Like because obviously it depends what you class as a credit.
Sure.
But also like my mind always goes, well, Nick Briggs is up there. Like Nick Briggs is in everything. And he's written so much as well. But Dick Mills is a great shout for it as well. So
well,
I mean,
I think what the other side of it is that he might have done. He's probably done so much work that was uncredited as well. Because back when I think there was a period where maybe Brian Hodgson was it who was doing the kind of like the special sound aspects, the sound effects things for the earlier serials.
Yeah.
But Dick Mills was still working on the program in some respect because he's kind of like the technician for the Radiophonic Workshop. He was basically in charge of kind of like maintaining all the machines, and so found himself working on so many things that way. Found himself working on the original version of the theme tune because he was kind of like operating an awful lot of the stuff that Delia Derbyshire was arranging. And he was cutting up the bits of tape for the bass line on it and stuff like that. So he's been there in so many other ways, as well as all the ways in which he's kind of like being from the 70s onwards or wherever it was, being credited with special sound.
Yeah, well, it's a wonderful pick. I'm always fascinated by the music of Doctor Who, and it's very fitting that we had a chat about it before. What do you think is? I mean, because there's so many people that you could have picked. Because there's so many people who've been involved in the sounds and the music of Doctor Who over the years. Why Dick Mills over them? Why do you think? Is it because of that lasting legacy, that how long he was involved for? Is it?
I think it's a natural prejudice as a sound designer myself to kind of like understand. I think how. I mean, obviously, we were talking earlier about the lighting design for Genesis of the Daleks and stuff like that, and it doesn't matter that the tiniest sort of thing that you see on screen and plenty of stuff that you don't see on screen, someone has worked night and day to get that to the place where it is with Doctor Who. But I think understanding as a sound designer how much of our sort of like our appreciation for like sort of unusual worlds comes from the sort of designs the sound effects, the things that kind of like drop in and out, and sometimes work on our subconscious as much as anything else. The nature of the hum that runs through the Dalek City or whatever is going to sometimes be just as important as the Daleks themselves. The Dalek voice, for instance, is a prime example of something where it might, I don't know if it was Dick Mills himself, but somewhere along the line, someone will have discovered that through trial and error and found the best possible way of making that kind of like that ring modulated croak. And so I think it's because he will have worked on pretty much every show from whenever he took over with the special sound right up until kind of like Survival, and he would have most likely had a very, very, very short time to respond to all of these things, because it would have taken a while for everything to get edited, and the best time for him possibly to do his I know that the best time for him to do his work would have been in between the final edit being available and the show actually being broadcast, which back in the day would have probably been a very, very short period of time.
Yeah.
So he would have been like sort of hammering away on various synthesizers, desperately attaching kind of like blaps and blips to different kinds of Gallifrey and ray gun, and it would have been a tough gig, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, well, wonderful pick. And Dick Mills is in the Corridor of Fame. where he deserves to be. His portrait has been hung up in the corridor of fame.
He's also, I have to say, in the interviews that I've seen with him, he's also a remarkably sort of normal guy doing a very, very strange job.
Yeah, it's an incredibly strange job. As you know, it's not your standard 9 to 5, is it?
Yeah.
But I mean that brings us to the end of the show. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
It's been wonderful, Josh. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, everything that I've said about your stories is 100% true. I mean, I know you can't say anything because Nick Briggs will probably turn up at your house with some armed men. And
you do that. You do that.
Yeah, put you in the back of a car, and we may never see you again. But is the inclination that we may see more of you in Big Finish in the future? Because I would love that.
I'm gonna keep going as long as I'll have me. I mean, you know, it's kind of one of those things where, because I spend a lot of time on Big Finish scripts, you know, arguably. Sort of more time than I should in certain ways, because I love reworking them, and I love getting the voices of these characters that I love absolutely down and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I tend to, as things stand, I tend to just kind of do one a year, but it's always an absolute joy to do it. And they're such a brilliant team to work with, and it's always it's always wonderful to kick around ideas for the next one. And so I'm going to keep doing that for as long as they'll take my my you know, kind of my weird and wretched ideas.
Yeah, good. Well, I cannot wait to hear what you do next. Before we go, and I'm not gonna lie, for the first time ever, I nearly forgot, because we're having a great time. I nearly forgot my final question, which I ask every week, and it's a tough one. I'm not gonna lie, a lot of people struggle with it. Take the first bit with a pinch of salt, but in a sentence-ish, what does Doctor Who mean to you?
More than anything else, it's been the myth in my life, the central myth that has told me that anything is possible. That's it.
Oh, that is lovely. I love hearing the answers to that question, and that's a great one. That's up there for me. I love that. Anything can happen. And that is has never been more true, especially in today's world. Sometimes the bad things happen, but look, very, very, very happy with that answer. I mean, before we go, please, this is your time to plug away anything that you're doing, anything that you want to promote, and where people can find you. You go ahead and tell everyone who's listening.
Well, tell you what. I mean, if no one's, there's still something that's up on BBC Sounds, which is a project very, very close to my heart as well, which is called Forest 404, and that's something that I wrote a few years back, which is it's a sci-fi eco thriller. It has lots of other different strands to the podcast as well, into not just the fiction that I wrote, but also sort of non-fiction essays that are attached to it, and some really, really gorgeous soundscapes. And for the Doctor Who fans out there, it stars Pearl Mackie, who gives what I think is an absolutely astonishing performance as the hero of the story, Pam. And she plays an archivist in the future who basically hears she stumbles upon a tape of rainforest. She has no idea what it is, because the rainforests have died centuries beforehand. She tries to find out what it is, but there are people who want her stopped for some reason or other, and bit by bit she finds out what her society that she lives in is based on, the foundations of it, just from this tape. And it's, like I say, great performance by Pearl, has some absolutely astonishing actors in it, and I think it's worth a listening.
Well, definitely. I definitely am going to be checking it out, and I'm going to pop a link in the description for anybody who wants to check it out. And I'll also put a link to your page on the Big Finish website. So if anyone wants to go and purchase any of the stories that have popped up that we've spoken about, and any other of Tim's work, you can go and find it there. And you're on Twitter as well, I believe, at Tim Atack.
At Tim Atack. Yes, that's right.
Yes, lovely. And you've been listening to Who Knew, a Doctor Who podcast. You can find us wherever you get your pods, and on YouTube as well, where you can get lovely video versions and you can see our lovely faces as we chat away. If you type in Who Knew, I'm sure you'll find it, but just go to our socials. So on Twitter, it's Who Knew, at Who Knew Podcast. You can find me on there at Josh Ryan Carr as well. And on TikTok, because I'm down with the kids now, at Who Knew Podcast, where I'll post clips and other random shit that I spew out of my face. You can support the podcast as well on Patreon for as little as £1 a month. You can get early access to podcasts, you can get bonus stuff, and I'll try and give you as much stuff as you can, but mainly it's to keep the lights on and to keep the mic on, so that I can keep making these lovely things. And you can get a bit of discount off our merch store as well. There's going to be some new products dropping, just some new t-shirts with some new versions of the logo on. So if you want a little t-shirt and rep Who Knew, you can go and purchase that. But before we go, again, Tim, thank you for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And
thanks, mate. Thank you. It's been
no
great.
worries. No, honestly, absolute honour to have you on. And please go and check out all of Tim's stuff if you're listening. And please like, share, subscribe, whatever. Send this around, show your mum, whatever. And thank you all for listening. And I'll see you next time. Massive thank you to all of our patrons, and especially Cal King. If you want to become a patron, you can join for as low as £1 a month and get loads of benefits and support the pod. Check out the link in the description. Thanks for listening to Who Knew, a Doctor Who podcast. You can check us out wherever you get your podcasts and now on YouTube. Please subscribe and leave us a review wherever you can, as it really helps us out. And a massive thanks to the Sononauts for lending their cover of the Doctor Who theme to be the theme for the podcast.